Imagine a world where ancient rulers shrouded in mystery and linked to biblical legends dominated the sands of Egypt. The enigmatic Hyksos, often branded as invaders, may hold the key to unraveling a tale of grandeur and deception. As we journey through the shadows of their reign, we'll uncover how these so-called shepherd kings could be intertwined with biblical figures, challenging long-held beliefs and revealing secrets buried beneath centuries of myth and history. The shepherd king of Egypt, Hyksos, or Israelites. It is stated in Magi, The Quest for a Secret Tradition by Adrian G. Gilbert, that after the death of the last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, around 1786 BC, Egypt descended into another dark age. This time, the turmoil was not due to internal revolution, but rather the invasion by a mysterious group known as the Hyksos. These outsiders, also referred to as the Shepherd Kings or Sea Peoples, ruled Egypt for approximately 200 years. This period is particularly intriguing from a biblical perspective, because if the stories of Abraham's migration and the settlement of the children of Israel in Egypt hold any truth, they would have taken place during this era. Adrian G. Gilbert, Magi, The Quest for a Secret Tradition. We now discover that the famous Israelites were powerful kings in one of the greatest civilizations on earth. We find that they were not oppressed captives or slaves, and that they were the same people as the so-called Hyksos kings. The Hyksos were known to be a strange and violent race that had ruled Egypt for 300 years, from the 13th dynasty down to the beginning of the 18th, where they were finally confronted and expelled. Top Jewish historians had already refuted the lie of Jewish slavery, but the mystery of their actual status was rarely probed. If they were not captives or enslaved people, then what were they? And why the falsification? The terminology of some passages in the Old Testament provides intriguing clues. Do not oppress an alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be aliens, because you were aliens in Egypt. Exodus chapter 23, verse 9. According to the history books, the Hyksos arrived during a time of unrest and anarchy in Egypt, when the pharaoh was Neshi. Neshi was a Negro from Nubia who managed to seize the throne for himself after a violent struggle with two weak successors of the 12th dynasty, Pharaoh Neferkara of the Sepekotep kings, whose vast empire extended from Nubia to the Mediterranean. Under the corrupt and inept rule of Neshi, Egypt was vulnerable before its enemies. According to experts, it was at this time the Hyksos attacked and established their despotic empire. Some Hyksos historians believe that the fearsome invaders were aided by the inept impostor dynasty of Nubians that rose after the fall of the Sepekoteps, and by the many refugees and immigrants who, though granted shelter in Egypt during times of want, cared little for the welfare of the land of their hosts. The Hyksos strengthened their numbers with their self-seeking, envious foreigners and found Egypt for the taking. After their successful takeover, they kept the country's borders open and welcomed foreigners into Egypt. The reign of their pharaoh Salatis opened Egypt's 15th dynasty. The native Egyptians prayed to the gods for release from those they refer to as the leper kings and the impure ones and the polluted. It came to pass that Egypt was possessed by the impure, and there was no lord and king. Fragment from an Egyptian folktale concerning the Hyksos invasion, preserved in the British Museum. The Enigma of the Shepherd Kings, Hyksos rule and biblical parallels. Josephus, the patriotic Jewish historian, believed that the Hyksos were the children of Israel. He quoted Manetho, who described them as people of ignoble race who boldly invaded our country, subduing it easily without a battle. They set our towns ablaze, destroyed the temples of the gods, and inflicted every kind of barbarity upon the people. Donald Mackenzie, Egyptian Myth and Legend, 1907. Michael Rice, in Who's Who in Ancient Egypt, stated, "The foreign infiltrations that occurred after the Old Kingdom's collapse began to undermine the stability of the entire Nile Valley. The 13th dynasty was one of the most unstable in Egypt's history, with few rulers leaving significant evidence of their reigns. Invaders emerged in the northern part of the country, establishing an independent kingdom that appeared Egyptian in many ways, but was fundamentally foreign to the Egyptian sacred traditions. Eventually, the Hyksos moved northwards and overran Memphis. They established their first principal capital there. They later moved to Avaris, which, according to biblical tradition, was the same city occupied by the Levite followers of Moses. Avaris was a garrison town, held by over 250,000 men in arms. Avaris was also known as Zoan. The latter term is close to Zion. If it is the same word, then the constant references by Jews to the time of Zion refer to the dynasty of the despotic Hyksos people to whom they were related. According to Ralph Ellis, the patriarch known as Abraham, from Abram, meaning of Ra the father, was the first pharaoh of these despised Hyksos people. His sister and wife Sarah eventually married the pharaoh of southern Egypt, forming a union with that rival and more native house. This alliance would have resulted in future mixed marriages, like Amenhotep III's with Tai and Yuya with Asenath, and claims to the throne from foreign-blooded heirs. The majority of the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty fit this type. The Hyksos then were nothing less than the pharaohs of Egypt during the 15th and 16th dynasties of Egypt. This is a period under the classical dating of Egypt that equates very well with the projected lifetime of the biblical Abraham. In this case, Abraham was not only a military leader, but he was quite possibly a pharaoh of Egypt as well. Ralph Ellis, Jesus, last of the pharaohs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were not poor, captive, downtrodden shepherds. They were actually the Hyksos, the shepherd kings who ruled as pharaohs of Egypt. Minoans, Scythians, and Set, unveiling the Hyksos' origins and their worship of Egypt's dark god. They brought and gathered great herds of cattle and flocks of sheep, as did Abram and his followers. These newcomers subdued much of Egypt because the Egyptians dared not fight, realizing the invaders' superiority. The Hyksos burned towns, destroyed temples, killed many, and took captives. The first Hyksos king, Salatis, forced the Egyptians to pay tribute and placed garrisons in their cities. He built a city called Abaris or Avaris, strategically located to dominate Egypt and check the Syrians. Abaris had strong walls and housed a garrison of 400,000 men. Salatis resided mainly in Memphis and repaired to Abaris every summer. The Hyksos ruled for 511 years before being expelled after a long and bitter war. Commons Beaumont, Britain, key to world history. According to Joseph Malais Madrievsky, migrations mentioned in the Bible took place during a time when Egypt was under foreign rule and more open to the outside world, which contrasts with an earlier era of isolation. It mentions groups of people predating the Israelites who were part of the movement of Semitic tribes and settled in the eastern delta region near Pithom. The presence of Epirus in Egypt around the middle of the 15th century BCE is also referenced. Allegedly, another Egyptian term for the Hyksos was shasu. This term meant shepherds, and we might note how frequently this term is employed in the Bible. The great scholar Gerald Massey wrote of the Shasu and identified them as Proto-Israelites in his book, Egypt, Light of the World. In this inscription, the pharaoh identifies the people of Israel with the Edomite Shasu nomads or shepherds and groups them with the marauders who invaded Egypt with the Libu and were slaughtered by the Battle of Persepes. Pa'arashep is also recorded on monuments. They were tribe or totemic community of cattle keepers and the tribes of the Shasu from the land of Aduma, who entered Egypt seeking grazing grounds in the eastern delta. During this time, when the Israel people were being annihilated as the Israelites in Syria, there was an exodus of the Edomite Shasu, which has been misinterpreted in biblical history. These tribes considered the eastern delta up to Zoan or possibly Zion their possession until Seti I drove them out. The term shepherd kings may be a mistranslation. Manetho likely misinterpreted Hiku Kasut, which means rulers of foreign lands, leading to the common belief that the Hyksos were outsiders. The buildings and art attributed to the Hyksos likely originated from native Egyptian craftsmen and artists, whose skills had been refined over millennia. Although the Hyksos were skilled, they probably received credit for creations made by the talented natives working under their direction. Furthermore, the presence of these foreigners likely ignited a nationalistic spirit among native Egyptians, inspiring renewed artistic expression. Some artwork found at Hyksos sites has been traced to the Minoan culture of Crete, suggesting a possible connection between the Cretans and the Hyksos. Some scholars believe that the Hyksos were horseback riding Hittites, while others think they were Greeks, Syrians, Amorites, Minoans, Scythians, Hurrians, or even Trojans. Evidence suggesting the Hyksos were long-term inhabitants of Egypt, rather than invaders, includes their worship of the ancient god Set, also known as Seth, Sutek, Seteh, or Seb, who ruled over lower northern Egypt. During the Hyksos period, Set was incorporated in the Heliopolitan Aeneid. He was the god of dark places, wild weather, and the inhospitable red desert known as Tesheret, which means red lands, the color associated with Set. By exploring the Hyksos and Shepherd Kings, we uncover not just historical facts, but a deeper understanding of Egypt's past. Their influence and biblical connections challenge our historical perceptions, revealing a more complex and intriguing narrative. Now, take the time to drop a comment telling us what you think. Like and share the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time.